The blizzard swallowed the road whole, and I panicked. A single porch light glowed through the white wall. A woman opened the door before I even knocked. "You can't drive in this," she said quietly. I stepped inside, shivering, unsure what I was walking into. She handed me a blanket and studied my face too long. "Stay the night," she whispered. "The roads won't survive till morning." I said yes, and nothing about my life stayed the same. My name is Josephine Callahan, 31. An architect from Denver. Engaged to a kind man named Daniel. Driving to a job interview in the mountains. I never expected a snowstorm to strand me outside a cabin, or that the woman who opened that door would unravel everything I thought I wanted. Her name was Wren Ashby. She lived alone, a wildlife biologist who'd chosen isolation over noise, in a cabin miles from cell service. She made coffee without asking, set a chipped mug in front of me, and told me the storm would likely last 3 days. I called Daniel to say I was safe. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Wren asked why I looked relieved instead of upset about being stranded. I didn't have an honest answer, so I said nothing. That first night, we sat by the fire while she told me about the elk herd she tracked, and I forgot to check my phone. I noticed her hands were rough, capable. Nothing like Daniel's soft, manicured ones. I noticed I was noticing at all. She asked my last name again the second morning, frowning slightly, like it tugged at something buried in her memory. "Callahan," she repeated slowly. "I knew a Callahan once. Madeline. We were close. Years ago. Before she passed." My chest tightened. Madeline was my older sister, dead 6 years now. A name I hadn't heard a stranger speak aloud in ages. "Maddie was my sister," I said. Wren went very still, staring at me like I'd become someone entirely different in that instant. She didn't explain further that day, only poured more coffee. But something shifted between us, heavier and more careful than before. I kept catching her watching me across the room, the way you'd study a photograph you thought you'd lost forever. By the third morning, the storm hadn't broken, and neither had whatever strange gravity had started pulling me toward her. Wren finally told me the truth. She and Maddie had been more than friends, years before Maddie died in the car accident. "She never told our family," I whispered, stunned that my sister had carried a whole hidden life none of us ever saw. Wren's eyes filled, and for the first time, her guarded expression cracked open, showing years of grief she'd never spoken aloud. We stayed up talking about Maddie until dawn, piecing together a sister I'd only half known. Layered and unafraid and free. I realized I envied that freedom, the kind Maddie had found and I'd spent my whole engagement quietly avoiding. Wren cooked breakfast the next morning, humming under her breath, and I found myself memorizing the sound instead of eating. "Does Daniel know you laugh like that?" she asked suddenly, nodding at me. I didn't remember the last time I had. Honestly. I called Daniel again that afternoon. He asked when I'd be home. I realized I hadn't thought about home once. Snow kept falling, thick and relentless, and secretly, shamefully, I hoped the plows would take their time reaching us. Wren showed me her journals, sketches of birds and mountains, private and unfinished, and trusted me with pages she'd shown no one. I told her about architecture, about designing buildings I never got to see built, about feeling erased inside my own career. "You talk about buildings the way people talk about people they love," she said. "Do you talk about Daniel that way?" I didn't answer. She didn't push. But the silence sat between us louder than anything either of us could have said. That night, our hands brushed passing a mug, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as we should have. I lay awake in the guest room, replaying the moment, furious at myself for wanting it to happen again. The next morning, she taught me to identify elk tracks in fresh snow, standing close enough that I forgot the cold entirely. "You're different out here," she said. "Quieter. Like you finally stopped performing for someone who isn't in the room. I thought about my mother's expectations, my father's pride in my engagement, the version of myself I'd built to please them. Ren never asked me to explain any of it. She simply existed beside me, patient, unhurried, like storms didn't scare her at all. On the 5th day, the power flickered out. We sat wrapped in blankets by candlelight, and I felt more myself than I had in years. Maddie once told me she envied people who got to choose love without flinching, Ren said softly. I think about that a lot. I asked if she'd ever loved anyone since Maddie. She shook her head. Not until a stranger showed up at my door. My heart lurched painfully. I knew exactly what she meant, and I was terrified of how much I wanted her to mean it. We almost kissed that night. Foreheads close. Breath shared. Before I pulled back, whispering an apology neither of us wanted. Don't apologize, she said. Just be honest with yourself before you're honest with me. I can wait a little longer. The roads finally cleared on day 6. I stood by my car, keys in hand, unable to make myself open the door. Go, Ren said gently, though her voice cracked slightly. But you know where I am. If you ever need to find your way back. I drove away crying, gripping the wheel, replaying every moment like it was already becoming a memory I couldn't hold on to. Daniel hugged me tightly when I got home, relieved and oblivious, and I hated how easily I let him believe nothing had changed. That night I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own engagement, my own life. I texted Ren a photo of the sunset over Denver. She replied within minutes. Wish you were watching it from here instead. We started talking daily, careful and coded, disguised as friendship, though we both knew exactly what we were circling around. My mother asked about wedding venues over dinner. I nodded along, picturing snow and firelight instead of white tablecloths and string quartets. Ren sent me pictures of elk crossing her property, of frost on the windows, small ordinary moments that felt like intimacy anyway. I found myself smiling at my phone more than I smiled at Daniel, and the guilt of that gnawed quietly at my chest. One night she called instead of texting. Her voice, low and familiar, undid something I'd been holding together for weeks. I think about you constantly, she admitted. I told myself I wouldn't say that, but I'm done pretending otherwise. I couldn't sleep after that call. I sat on my bathroom floor, phone against my chest, finally admitting the truth to myself. I wasn't confused. I hadn't been confused in a long time. I had simply been too afraid to name what I felt. I looked up flights to the mountain town nearest her cabin, then deleted the search, then looked it up again an hour later. Daniel proposed a wedding date over breakfast, smiling, certain. I said yes because I didn't yet have the courage to say no. That night I dreamed of the cabin, of candlelight, of Ren's hand almost reaching mine, and woke up aching with longing. I told my best friend, Rachel, everything. She wasn't shocked. Joe, she said, you've never once talked about Daniel the way you talk about her. Rachel asked what was stopping me. I listed my parents, my career, the wedding deposit, Daniel's kindness, excuses dressed as reasons. None of that is love, Rachel said gently. That's fear wearing love's coat. You know the difference now. I booked a weekend trip back to the mountains, telling Daniel it was for the job, telling myself it was for closure. Ren met me at the trailhead, and the second I saw her, closure was clearly never what I'd actually driven up there for. You came back, she said, breathless, like she hadn't quite believed I would, despite every call and text between us. I couldn't stay away, I admitted, and this time, when we stood close, neither of us pulled back from what came next. We kissed for the first time under a sky full of stars, and every doubt I'd carried for months went suddenly, blessedly silent. I'm still engaged, I whispered against her forehead, ashamed, terrified. Undeniably happy for the first time in longer than I could remember. I know, Ren said. So we figure it out. Together. I'm not asking you to choose me over your own life. Just to be honest. I drove home rehearsing confessions the entire way. None of them adequate. All of them terrifying. None of them ready to leave my mouth. I found Daniel waiting up, worried. And the moment he saw my face, he already seemed to know something had shifted. Is there someone else? He asked quietly. I couldn't lie to him anymore. Not after everything. Not after finally knowing myself. I told him about Ren. About the cabin. About years of performing a life that never truly fit the person underneath it. Daniel's anger surprised me less than his hurt did. 6 years. Joe, he said. I deserved honesty a long time before now. He left that night, taking a bag, saying he needed space to process a life he'd been planning that had just collapsed. Word spread faster than I expected. My mother called within 2 days. Voice tight. People are talking. Is this true? I told her everything, bracing myself. But her silence on the phone felt colder than any shouting could have been. You're throwing away a good man for confusion, she said. This isn't who we raised you to be. Josephine. My father refused to discuss it entirely, leaving the room whenever my name came up, treating my honesty like a personal insult. My younger brother, Tommy, was the only one who didn't flinch. I always wondered about you and weddings, he said, almost smiling. Work grew strained too. A senior partner made an offhand comment about keeping things professional, and I understood exactly what he meant. I called Ren that night, exhausted, and admitted I was scared this would cost me my family, my career, everything I'd built. I can't promise it won't, she said honestly. I can only promise I won't disappear the way people usually do. That honesty terrified me more than reassurance would have. I realized she'd been left before, and she expected the same from me. She told me about her ex, a woman named Petra, who'd chosen a marriage to a man over the life they'd built together. I understood why, Ren said quietly. I just never recovered from being the thing someone was ashamed enough to leave behind. I promised her I wasn't Petra. She nodded. But I saw the old fear sitting behind her eyes, unconvinced and guarded. My mother stopped calling for 2 weeks. The silence hurt more than any argument. A punishment disguised as simply having nothing to say. Rachel stood by me fiercely. But even she admitted the wedding cancellation had cost me friendships I hadn't expected to lose. I drove to the cabin every other weekend, exhausted from the distance, from hiding parts of my life from people who used to know everything. Ren's community wasn't much kinder. A neighbor made a pointed comment about outsiders during a grocery run, and Ren's jaw tightened silently. It's not always like this, she said afterward. Apologetic. Though I could tell she'd absorbed comments like that for years already. I started to understand the isolation she'd chosen wasn't just about wildlife. It was protection. Built slowly. Brick by careful brick. My mother finally called again, asking to meet. Her voice strained. I drove to her house bracing for another argument. Instead, she sat me down and told me something I never expected. Her own sister, my Aunt Carol, had been gay. She left for California in 1988, my mother said. The family stopped speaking her name. I've regretted my silence for decades. I sat frozen, realizing history was quietly repeating itself, and that my mother had been carrying private grief this whole time too. I don't want to lose you the way I lost her, my mother admitted, tears finally breaking through her careful composure. It wasn't full acceptance. Not yet. But it was a door cracked open where I'd expected only a locked, silent wall. I told Ren about the conversation. She grew quiet, then admitted her own mother had died before ever knowing the truth about her. I'm happy for you, she said, and meant it. even as grief for her own unfinished story sat plainly across her face. Meanwhile, the job I'd interviewed for during the storm called back, offering a position in the very town where Ren lived. Felt like fate. Until I realized accepting it meant leaving my Denver firm, my parents' city. Everything familiar behind me. Daniel resurfaced unexpectedly, asking to meet for closure. I agreed, nervous, unsure what remained to say between two people once engaged. He apologized for his anger, admitted he'd sensed something missing for years but had been too afraid to name it either. I hope she's good to you, he said, and I believed him, grateful the ending hadn't curdled entirely into bitterness. I accepted the job offer. Ren cried when I told her. Careful, hopeful tears, like she still didn't trust good news fully. Packing up my apartment felt like shedding an old life, layer by layer, revealing something truer underneath every box I filled. My father still hadn't spoken to me directly, communicating only through my mother, a silence that ached more than shouting ever could. The week before my move, an old family friend publicly criticized my lifestyle at a dinner party my mother hosted. My mother, to my shock, defended me at that table, voice shaking but steady. That's my daughter. Watch your words. It was the first time she'd chosen me openly, in public. A real cost. And I sat there stunned into grateful silence. Ren helped me move into a small house near her cabin, close enough for daily visits, far enough for both of us to breathe. We took things slowly at first, wary of moving too fast after everything we'd both survived to reach this point. My father finally called. Gruff. Brief. Your mother says you're happy, he said. That's good. Josephine. That's good. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was a beginning. And I learned to accept beginnings without demanding they arrive as declarations. Petra, Ren's ex, resurfaced online. Married now. Commenting on an old photo of Ren, stirring up feelings Ren thought she'd buried. Seeing her happy with him used to hurt, Ren admitted. Now it barely registers. I think that means something's finally healed. Winter returned. Another storm rolling through the mountains, and this time I didn't need shelter. I already belonged there. We sat by the same fire, a year almost exactly from our first meeting, and Ren reached for my hand without hesitation. Last year you were a stranger stranded at my door, she said. This year, you're just home early for dinner. 6 months into our life together, Ren received an offer to lead a wildlife study in Alaska for 18 months. A career milestone. She hesitated to even tell me, guilt written across her face, afraid the timing would feel like a betrayal after everything we built. You should take it, I said, meaning it. Even as my chest tightened at the thought of losing what we'd only just found. We fought about logistics for days, long distance, video calls, holidays spent apart, the practical erosion of a relationship still finding its footing. I've lost people to distance before, Ren admitted. I don't want to lose you to a research grant in time zones. I found an old box of Maddie's belongings while helping my mother clean the attic. Journals I'd never had the courage to open before. Inside, I found entries describing Ren, describing plans to leave Denver together. Dated the same week Maddie died in the accident. Maddie had been driving to tell our parents the truth the night her car slid off an icy overpass, never reaching them. I sat on the attic floor, sobbing, understanding suddenly that grief and love had been tangled together in my family far longer than I knew. I brought the journal to Ren, hands shaking, and watched her read pages she'd clearly spent years wondering about, never allowed to see. She was coming to tell them, Ren whispered. She was finally going to be brave. And the storm took that from her. We held each other for a long time that night, grieving a version of Maddie's life that never got the chance to happen. I won't let fear steal my chance the way it stole hers, I told Ren. Whatever happens with Alaska, We figure it out honestly. An anonymous letter arrived at my new firm, criticizing my personal choices and questioning my professionalism, clearly meant to intimidate and isolate me. I nearly quit out of humiliation. But Rachel flew out to visit and reminded me that hiding had never once made me safer. I reported the letter to HR instead of staying silent, refusing, for the first time, to shrink myself to avoid other people's discomfort. My father called unexpectedly that same week. His voice unusually gentle. "Come home," he said. "Your mother's found something you should see." I drove back to Denver, anxious, and found my parents had cleared out a box of Aunt Carol's old letters, saved secretly for decades. My father hadn't spoken about Carol in 30 years. Reading her words aloud, his voice broke, grief finally surfacing after a lifetime of silence. "I let my sister disappear because I was afraid of what people would say," he admitted. "I won't make that mistake twice, Josephine." For the first time, he hugged me without hesitation, without careful distance, and told me he was proud of who I'd become. I returned to the mountains lighter. Carrying decades of buried family grief finally cracked open into something resembling healing and understanding. And, meanwhile, had been quietly researching alternatives, a shorter Alaska rotation, remote work options, anything to avoid the 18-month separation entirely. "I don't want to choose between my career and you," she admitted. "I spent years choosing loneliness. I won't choose it again willingly." We compromised, 3 months in Alaska instead of 18, with visits planned, video calls scheduled, a plan built on communication instead of fear. The night before she left, we sat on the cabin porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the same stars from our very first kiss. "Come back to me," I said. "Not because you have to, because you want to. That's the only promise I need from you." "I've never wanted anything the way I want this life with you," Ren said. "Alaska is temporary. This isn't." I finally believed that. She left the next morning. The cabin felt enormous without her. Every empty room a reminder of how much she'd filled before. We video called every night, sometimes just to eat dinner together across thousands of miles, refusing to let distance quiet what we'd built. My mother visited during Ren's absence, awkward but trying, asking real questions about our relationship instead of avoiding the subject entirely. "I want to understand," she said. "I don't want to lose more time the way we lost Carol. Tell me about her." Josephine. I told her everything: the storm, the cabin, Maddie's journal, the fear, the healing, and my mother cried through most of it. "Your sister would be so happy for you," she said finally. "I think she'd say you finally finished what she never got to start." 2 months into the separation, Ren called sounding shaken. A research vessel accident had injured 2 colleagues. She'd been badly frightened, though unharmed herself. "I kept thinking about you," she admitted, voice trembling. "About everything we still haven't done yet. I don't want to run out of time." That call changed something in both of us, a clarity neither distance nor fear could dull, sharpened instead by real, soudain danger. "When I come home," Ren said, "I don't want to keep living in 2 places. I want an actual life. With you. Fully." I didn't sleep that night, replaying her words, allowing myself, finally, to imagine a future I'd once been too afraid to picture. The final month of separation crawled by slowly, each day marked off on a calendar taped inside my kitchen cabinet like a countdown. My father called to ask when Ren was coming home, adding, almost shyly, that he'd like to properly meet her this time. I nearly cried at the request, remembering how recently his silence had felt like a wall I couldn't imagine ever coming down. Rachel helped me plan a small dinner for Ren's return, insisting the moment deserved witnesses, deserved celebration, deserved to be seen and honored. The morning of her flight, I drove to the airport hours early, too anxious and excited to sit still anywhere else. I watched the arrivals board change, heart pounding, and when she finally walked through, I forgot every rehearsed thing I'd planned to say. We stood in the middle of the terminal, holding each other, neither of us caring who watched or what they might think. "I'm home," Ren said into my shoulder. Actually home. Not just back. I mean at this time. Completely. Without any hesitation left. That night. Dinner. My parents met her properly for the first time. Careful but genuinely warm. Asking real questions about her work. My father shook her hand and said, "Take care of my daughter," his voice thick, his meaning clearly reaching far beyond the words. Ren squeezed my hand under the table, and I understood we'd crossed into something neither of us was willing to walk away from now. A week later, she pulled out a small velvet box over breakfast, hands shaking slightly. "I've been carrying this since Alaska," she said. "Marry me," she said simply. Not because either of us is running from anything anymore. Because I finally know exactly what I want. I said yes before she even finished the sentence, laughing and crying at once, certain in a way I'd never once been with Daniel. We decided to hold the ceremony at the cabin itself, the place where every true thing between us had first quietly begun. My mother offered to help plan everything, throwing herself into flowers and seating charts with an enthusiasm that surprised us both completely. My father asked, hesitantly, if he could walk me partway down the aisle, at least, if that was something I still wanted. I told him nothing would make me happier. Watching relief and joy cross his face like a weight finally set down. We tracked down Aunt Carol through an old address in California, uncertain if she'd even respond after 30 years of family silence. She called within a week, voice trembling. "I never thought anyone in this family would reach for me again," she admitted quietly. She agreed to come, flying in from Sacramento, meeting relatives who'd erased her for decades, brave enough to try reconciliation regardless. Meeting her felt like meeting a piece of my own history I never knew I'd been missing. Resilient, funny, achingly familiar. "You look like your grandmother," Carol told me, studying my face. She would have loved seeing this family learn to be honest. Rachel helped me choose a dress, simple and unfussy, nothing like the elaborate gown I'd once picked out for Daniel's wedding. Ren's research colleagues flew in too, filling the cabin with laughter, proof that the isolation she'd once chosen no longer defined her life. The morning of the ceremony, snow dusted the mountains lightly, gentle and quiet. Nothing like the fierce blizzard that had first brought us together. I stood at the cabin's edge, looking at the trail where I'd once stumbled through a storm, terrified and lost and searching for shelter. My father took my arm, voice unsteady. "Your sister should be here," he said. "I think, somehow, she still is." We placed a small photo of Maddie near the altar, a quiet acknowledgement of the love story that had, in its own way, led us here. Walking toward Ren, I felt every version of myself I'd ever hidden finally align into one steady, unashamed, entirely certain person. Ren waited by the fire pit, in a simple dark suit, eyes wet, watching me approach like she still couldn't believe her luck. "You found your way back to my door again," she whispered as I reached her. "I promised to keep it open forever." We wrote our own vows. Mine spoke of storms and shelter. Hers spoke of loneliness finally ending, of choosing bravery over fear. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, gripping my father's hand, gripping Carol's hand, 3 generations finally sitting in the same honest room. When the officiant pronounced us married, the small crowd erupted, and for a moment, I forgot every hard year that led here. We released a single paper lantern into the dusk sky afterward, quietly, for Maddie, watching it drift until it disappeared beyond the treeline. "She's the reason we found each other," Ren said, watching it go. "I like to think she's somewhere, finally, watching us too." My father raised a toast at dinner, voice steady this time. calling Ren the daughter he'd been slow, but proud to gain. Carol pulled me aside quietly. "Don't let fear cost you 30 years like it cost me," she said. "You already haven't. I'm proud of you." Rachel gave a toast that made the whole room laugh and cry simultaneously, reminding everyone how far I'd come from that snowy stranded night. Daniel, unexpectedly, sent a card that arrived days later, wishing us well, closing a chapter with more grace than I dared hope for. Petra never resurfaced again, and Ren admitted she'd finally, fully, stopped waiting for old wounds to reopen without warning. We danced by the fire late into the night, exhausted and joyful, surrounded by family that had nearly been lost to silence. My father pulled Ren aside near the end of the night, and I watched them talk quietly, easily, like the wall between them had simply dissolved. Later, he told me what he'd said: "Take care of each other. That's the only thing that ever really mattered." In the end, we spent our first married morning exactly where we'd spent our first morning together. Coffee in chipped mugs. Snow outside the window. "Any regrets?" Ren asked, teasing, though her eyes were serious, watching for the honest answer underneath my inevitable laughter. "Only that I almost let fear keep me from ever driving up this mountain," I said. "Everything else, I'd choose again." Exactly. We hung Maddie's photo permanently by the fireplace, alongside a small letter from Carol, finally honoring the women our family once tried to forget. My mother visits often now, no longer awkward, asking Ren about her research, asking me about our garden, simply present, simply loving. My father built us a small bench outside the cabin, engraved quietly with Maddie's name, a place to sit when the mountains felt heavy. We are, all of us, still healing in pieces, but for the first time in my life,
I'm healing honestly.
Fully. Unafraid. I used to think love meant hiding the truest parts of myself to keep everyone else comfortable and close. Now I know love means walking through the storm anyway, trusting someone will open the door, and staying once they do. Andy.